Module 2 is a rather quick module to go through, and its purpose is to allow us to see how we can analyze existing runs that have run and look at how we can get the outputs to evaluate making changes to any errors or fixing any errors or being able to improve the flow in some way. When you're working with any particular flow, the dashboard or the start page for the flow gives you a little panel where it shows you all the runs previously. But each of those has a link by the date that you can click on, and the purpose of that is it goes and gives you the outputs of the succession or the run of that. And that will provide you with 3 different legend indicators. So you have a green tick, which is to tell you that action was, and the triggers, so all steps were triggered successfully. You'll get a grey cross that says the action did not run, and there's 2 reasons why you'll see that. And if there was an error with the action in particular, so maybe the condition was looking for numbers in a text string, maybe I was looking for a file that someone's checked out, so of course my action couldn't open it and it crashed. Those are the things that it will actually report back on why it failed. Now the action did not run will then show all the remaining actions that didn't have the opportunity to fire because of the failure. But the other reason why the action did not run happens, and it's not shown in the book, is because when you run a flow that has a condition like this, and the idea is that when one condition is met, so let's say this was true, it would then run those, but it wouldn't run these ones, and therefore you would have little grey crosses to the right of each of their actions. So that's the other case where you'd see that grey cross box. So when we look at the outputs, again, it's all in a JSON. It's arranged in the properties of the data and then the data itself. And you can see the red text is the name of the property. And then the blue data, blue information is the content of the information it's providing back. And it's not brilliant. It's not really easy to spot. And some of it, because it's all made up of unique IDs and encoded information, is just unreadable. But many of this can actually be very useful, because if I do get an ID back, that represents the object that it was trying to work with. So that object could be a SharePoint site, it could be a team, it could be a file in a SharePoint library. And the idea is that unique ID is truly unique within the entire service. So no 2 files in SharePoint, no matter what sites you have and how many sites you have, no 2 files anywhere in the SharePoint service will have the same file ID. No 2 teams, and you can build teams with the same name. I could have someone create a human resources one and someone else could create a human resources one, but they'll never have the same ID behind the team display name. So these are quite useful, because you can then copy and paste these and pass them through in order to find out exactly what it was trying to connect to. And you sometimes see those IDs sitting at the top of a web address, especially the SharePoint ones, or when you go to create a new list item, you see the ID at the top there to trigger where it's pointing to. So you can copy and paste these sometimes and be able to sort of force it to show you what it was trying to achieve. So let's take that. I'm going to do an example that is purely for triggering failure, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that same team stationary audit, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change that. So I'm going to rename it, and let's say this is actually now a stationary request. So my previous Power Automate is no longer going to work unless I modify the name that I've used now. But with this, I'm now going to pretend that I'm storing all the user's stationary requests inside this same Excel table. Now what I would like it to do is get the user to then specify the item and the quantity, but I would like my Power Automate to automatically populate the requested by, and I'm going to grab that via the user's account name, and then the requested, I'm going to get that to populate with a function called now that's going to populate it with the current date and time. So same table, but I'm now using this for requests rather than audit, and I'm going to leave the other data in there, but I'm not going to be worried about the request ID, so you'll probably find that blank. I'm not going to dwell on all this extra stuff because I'm not using the Excel table in the same way. So let's get to work. Let's go into here. I'm going to create a brand new one, and it's going to be once again an instant that I would like to manually trigger. So I'm going to click the instant, call this one stationary request, and I'm going to put next to it trigger, because I'm going to have two of the types of these, and this is just to be purely for demonstration of debugging a flow. So there it is, manually trigger the flow. The purpose is I would like it to go into that same Excel workbook. So I'm going to go into the Excel online business and tell it to add a row into the table. And I'm going to, at this moment, just populate the information that I have, which is the site. And again, you'll notice I'm grabbing the group, but I can grab the SharePoint site where the file is and go and point to the library. It doesn't matter, both of these connectors work the same way. But notice that is the Office 365 group that the team and the SharePoint point to. I'm going to go to the library, and I'm then going to go to point to the file. And finally the table. Okay, now that I've pointed to the table, the last bit of it is now pulled up and recognised all the fields, and now what I'll do is I want to populate these with certain information. Now the item and the quantity is required by the user. So what I'm going to do now in this manually triggered, something we cover on the previous course, the essentials. I'm going to go into this trigger, expand it, and I'm going to provide some inputs. So I'm going to ask it to give me a text input for the item. And although it says input, that's the actual true name of that option. All I'm now going to do is change the display text the user sees. So that will say item. And then I leave that to be the presence of what they see. So it will just say, please enter your input. I'm actually going to change that to say, please enter your stationary item. So that's a prompt they see. And the other input will be a number, which I'm going to put in as quantity. And I'm going to use full name. It's not to mistake it with the field that's in there. And I'm going to put in, please enter the number of the above item. Or quantity, that'll do. Excellent. So when we manually trigger this flow, it's going to give these pop-up boxes on the right hand side, and the user will now need to fill them in. And then when that happens, it will then pre-populate the other fields. So now that I've provided those triggers, I'm going to go into the box below. And see again, I've got the item and the quantity. Watch this. If I go into the item box here, go and grab it from the manually trigger a flow, and I'm looking for the item and quantity. There's the item. There's the quantity. So I'm just going to go and grab the item first. Wonderful. And then the quantity, same thing again. Love this horrible zooming. There we go. Quantity, and populate that in there. Now the requested by and the requested are going to be pre-populated through fields, and this is where I'm going to get them to crash. Okay, so the requested by, I'm going to go just above this add a row, and I'm going to grab a new action, and this is going to be using the Office 365, if I can spell it, profile. So this, if I type in profile, you can see it actually automatically picks up the Office 365 users data connection. This is where we can go and grab the information about the particular user who's run this Power Automate. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to get, I could get my profile, and it'll always get the profile of the person running the actual Power Automate. So I'm going to get my profile, so I don't have to go searching for the user. It's the one that's logged in. Excellent. Now I don't have to put any other information in. It knows to go and get that one person from the list. Perfect. And now, underneath it, I'm just going to go to that requested by, and then inside the above action, find the user's details. What should I grab? Let's grab, just for the example's sake, the display name, the person's full name. Okay, and then the requested, well, I actually want that to be an expression. Okay, now if I go into here and put in, so I'm going to type in UTC. In fact, our golden rule always tell people is if you're new to these expressions, the trick is to go into the expression tab and use the Excel function. So if you know what it was called in Excel, try that first, because in most cases it tends to sort of search and bring back a similar one. So if I type in now, there is, as you can see, a function inside the Power Automate called UTC now. So UTC now, this doesn't require any arguments, so inside the brackets, nothing, leave that empty. Now that should work beautifully. However, I'm going to make it crash, and to do that I'm going to go into the advanced options at the top here, and it's asking me to choose what fields. Now what it means by that is I can choose what fields to output into the flow run. So when I run the flow and we go and click on the date, it will say here are the fields you've asked that I'm going to output to you, and this is kind of a good way of saying these are the things that I want to use to make sure that the flow is running the correct information. So it says here's some examples: surname, department, job title. I'm going to go in there, and as you saw, I grabbed the display name, so I'm going to go and grab the display name. Now you've obviously seen this run before, you know this is going to fail, and you've even seen why. So this is kind of a little example of that, and I'll probably go into a bit more detail in a minute. So I'm going to save that. Here we go. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to test this out. So I'm going to test it from here, so that way I can see the outputs piling through. So I can click the test and say I'm going to perform the trigger action now. So do that, and then click save and test. It's going to get me to check my connections first. It always does that. Just have to live with it. So good. Click continue, and now it's asking me for my information. So at this point, it's at the blue box. It's here. So I'm going to put in there, let's put in paper, A4 plain, and I want 2 reams or whatever of that. There we go. Now we go to the bottom, I can run the flow, and then in the background what will happen is I should start seeing the outputs appear. So it says it's successfully started. And I'm thinking big green tick, yeah, that looks good, I like that. But please note it says your flow run successfully started, and the keyword is started. So if I click done, it says no, it actually failed. So it's really confusing. It's saying the trigger went off and did its thing. It's saying, oh, I've gone away and I've started running the process now, and here you can see it kind of failed on that option as predicted. And the other way that I'd see that is if I had run that outside of the flow, you, as you've seen before, would see that in the list. So if I do a stationary request trigger and click it in the dashboard, you'll see the failure there as well. And the same way that I can click on that particular run instance, click its date, and again I can see all the steps. So this one works successfully. Green tick, beautiful. Red tick on the get my profile. And if I look at the outputs, it's not brilliantly clear, but it's saying here parsing, select and expand failed. So we know that it was asking me to select the fields I wanted. So that was kind of a clue there. It's a bad request, and that's because I used a field that it didn't like. It didn't exist. So you've got to be careful with these. Now the golden rule of this is when you're working with a lot of these fields, they typically have this same standard naming convention that most languages use, like C# and Java, and that is they typically start with lowercase letters, and the only time you ever see a capitalized one is when it's the first letter of a new word. So they don't have spaces, they just sort of concatenate it together, and the first letter of each additional word is capitalized. We call that camel case, so that when you're working with functions, if I wanted to have something called forename or first name, you would typically do that. Bad on this text, but the idea behind it is that the capital letters create the height difference that generates humps, which is why it's called camel case. That's the idea of that. Okay, whether you use a capital F at the beginning or not, that's your choice. Most people, developer-wise, tend to sort of stick to the rule of thumb to make things a bit more consistent. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's not brilliant in the sense that the information's there, but it takes a little while to get used to what it all means. And some of this is a whole load of gobbledygook to me, and I've been using this for a year. So it's a learning curve. It really is. But ultimately, the most important thing is telling you where it failed. It failed on this step. All I've got to do now is try and identify what the problem is. But underneath that, because that one failed, this one didn't have an opportunity to run. It couldn't do that. So when we create our flows, if I go and edit this, the reason why Excel was programmed not to run is because of this little ellipsis here where we've got the configure run after. So by default, when you create your actions, it will only run that action if the previous one was successful. This is important. It triggers that automatically because it knows I was trying to get data from that previous one. So the moment I used a field from that action and passed it into the X1 below, it said, well, in order for this to work, I'm going to pre-tick this for you and say only if this is successful. If I took that orange box out, then it would only run on the again, it would automatically trigger or tick based on circumstance, but it's always worth going in there and actually providing your determination. Now, on the previous course, we show parallels, and a parallel branch is used to sort of make it run two things or more at once. Now, the main reason why we use parallel branches is to say, right, okay, run that if the first one was successful, or do this. So I'm actually say send me an email notification and say flow run, and I'm going to call that, I'm going to grab that stationary request trigger, I'm going to copy and paste it because I'm lazy, and then put failed. The error, and because I know that I'm running this particular function right after the get mode profile, I'm going to specify the error occurred on or before the get my profile. Now, I would only do this in one situation, and that is I've actually done a brand new flow. I've tested it to the hilts and it works beautifully, but I know I have to what I call Muppet proof it, and that's to give it to end users. Now, end users will do things in a totally different way to what we expect. We're always doing it based on the way we expect the flow to be run. So I always tend to sort of say, okay, trigger this to me if the above one failed. So I can say configure run after if it failed, or if for any reason it timed out. So those are the examples I'll set there. So the idea now is that if I run this again, I should not only get the fail run, but because someone else is going to trigger it, not me, if it does fail, rather than that person hunt me down and try and find me and say, John, it didn't work, I'll get a notification passed to my mobile phone and to my laptop that will tell me that's failed. So I'll be on the awareness just straight away. So I can save that. And again, because it's failed, I'm going to see if I get that notification. Again, I might pause the video and wait 5 minutes for the notification to pop up, but we'll see. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And you can see, can you see, is the little arrows change color based on the actual configuration of. So, okay, so I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to my flow and I'm going to run it again. So I'm going to test it. I'll perform the trigger, save and test. I am just going to add some text now. You know what this does. So I'm going to put some text in there, a number in there, run the flow, and it says it started successfully. Yes, we know that. However, the successfulness of it is this crashed, but now this actually run. So that's not in the book, and I think that's a really good thing to show you that when you run you could test the life out of your flows, but when you give them to end users and then you're carrying on with other work, they'll run it, it will crash, you won't expect it. At least you've got something in there that says, look, if that happens, give me a notification. And then I'm going to wait 6 hours for that notification to pop up. Oh, there you go, that's quite quick. And it gives me this hopefully. There you go, there it is. The error occurred on or before the get my profile v2. Now, that's brilliant. So I've now covered the fact that I've tested it. Now I've put in some extra things in case someone else runs it and it fails. Now, ultimately, what I've got to do is try and fix it. So when you go into there, you use this as much as you can to try and identify what the problem is. Not always brilliant, but ultimately, if I go into the edit, I know the situation was the data I was trying to get it to pass through to me was not valid. So I know that it's called display name, but it's all one word and it's only has a capital N in the case. While I'm in there, I could actually pass some other information. The person's display name and the job title. Okay, and as you can see, a comma is all you require to actually pass the information through. So I'm going to save that. And I'm going to test it and trigger it again. Save and test. Let's put something in there like pens, black, ×3. And then put in, I want 2 packs of those. There we go. Run flow. Started successfully. Click done. Oh, yay. So this time it did pick up the right data. And because that information I passed in, that's what its purpose was, is to say, look, okay, when you run the flow, I can pass some extra information through to that to make sure that I am picking up the correct user. Okay, so there we go. Without that, that box would run through and I would have no idea who the user was that triggered this flow. So this is really useful. And sometimes I put the get my profile in even when I don't need it, just purely so I can grab which user quickly actually fired the flow. In this case, I was using it, as you saw in the Excel spreadsheet. There it goes. So it's passing through for now the output of the items, the quantity, who the delegate was, and the date and time that it grabbed from the UTC. If you haven't spotted this before, UTCs, I explained this on the Essentials again. It's the way it must always do it is year hyphen month hyphen date, so it's in reverse, capital T, and then hours, minutes, seconds, and then points of a second. Z for Zulu. It's a military thing. I was never in the military. There we go. So that works beautifully, says he. So viewing a flow and looking at the runs output and then using that output to analyze the flow itself, see where failures are or see where things aren't just quite doing what you're expecting them so you can tweak it and improve it.